This podcast features criminologists discussing sensitive themes and topics. Listener discretion is advised. A woman is brutally assaulted and left for dead, but survives and finds out that her predator is the most unlikely person. This is the Amber Smith story. Hello, Amy, and hello, listeners.
Hi, Meghan.
Amy, we are at a great time of year. You know, this is like my favorite. We're done, and it's wonderful. I'm beginning to feel relief. I'm a little bummed to miss some events this year, like CrimeCon, but unfortunately, as we both know, I can't really travel at this time because I am a little too pregnant to be on a plane. So, you know.
And let's be honest, you don't like traveling anyway. Now you just have a valid excuse.
That's true. I like being at CrimeCon, but I don't like getting on the plane. So yes, now I have an excuse. But hopefully I can make up for it next year.
Yes.
And you know, even though I can't physically go very far, we aren't slowing down on any of our events for our very loyal supporters. I don't know about you, but book clubs and happy hours are some of my favorite events.
Yes.
And we are going to keep those coming, so don't even worry about that. For today's story, which focuses on a young woman named Amber Smith, I heard of it a few years ago in the news, and I don't know how this works, Amy, but it magically popped up on my Yahoo feed. How does that work?
It's called technology, and they know what you want, and they knew you'd like this episode.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't understand. I was like, wow, that popped up, and I thought about that case, and like, you know, it was there a couple years ago.
You probably Googled it once, and Google's attached to your Yahoo, and it told Yahoo you wanted to hear about it.
Honestly, I would have figured that out, just so you know, but I don't remember Googling it. I only remember being interested in it a couple of years ago. Are they like serving it up again? Like, hey, here's a reminder, you were interested.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they're reading your mind.
You don't know how it works either. I just want to point that out.
I don't.
Since Yahoo presented it to me, I felt like I would take this suggested case from Yahoo this time.
Great.
This is unfortunately a brutal crime, but there are also themes of survival and hope, and there's even an interesting twist in the middle of this case. Now let me introduce you to Amber Smith. Amber Smith was 20 years old, living in Fort Collins, Colorado at the time of events we discussed today. Not much is reported about Amber's background, except that she had some rough teenage years, hanging out with the wrong crowd and getting into some trouble, but she had turned things around for herself. Amber, in fact, had recently gotten her GED while working full-time to care for her 3-year-old son, Gabriel, who was reportedly the center of her universe. Amber had friends who adored her and described her as the warmest person. And you certainly believe her friends when listening to Amber's interviews. I know we can't judge people, but there's a gentle warmth about her that seems evident to me, even after what she's had to endure. I can just feel that warmth coming off of her. So the last Friday of August in 2013 was a lovely evening in Fort Collins, Colorado. A college town with many bars. People were enjoying kind of the last licks, I guess, of the summer, the weather, by eating outside at restaurants and having picnic dinners in their backyards. Things were relatively quiet that evening until about 4 a.m., when several neighbors called about a woman screaming for help in a local park. A deputy named Dane Stratton responded and heard the woman's screams. So this was a legitimate call. This wasn't, drunken people strolling out of bars, yelling. This was quite serious. Now, the deputy had trouble finding her at first, but eventually saw a woman lying on the ground, naked, completely bound in red duct tape.
She was alive?
She was alive. The tape was on her, but it was also over her whole face and her eyes.
Oh my God.
So she couldn't see. Luckily, she could breathe. The woman had been beaten very badly, Amy, and it was clear, I think, from the moment he arrived that she was left to die, but she was alive and she was fighting for her life.
This is one of those examples that if you hear something, see something, you have to call, because it sounds like they were fighting against time in this situation. If nobody called, then who knows what would have happened.
Very true, but the great thing is many people called, so yes. Deputy Stratton freed her from the tape and quickly rushed the woman to the emergency room. In the ambulance, deputies attempted to get as much information as possible from her, but at this point, she was really unable to recall a lot of the details. She was clearly hysterical and she was in shock. The woman who identified herself as Amber Smith had a broken jaw, ligature marks all over her neck from strangulation, a very badly battered body, a terrible head injury that doctors would later find out led to a brain bleed, along with a very badly swollen face. Literally, if she hadn't been able to answer questions, EMS wouldn't have been able to identify her based on her physical appearance. That's how bad she was injured. At the hospital, a little while after her injuries were tended to, Amber was able to start recalling some details. She had been with a male friend named Eric, and they were drinking alcohol in another part of town, in fact, in another park. Remember I said she was found in a park?
Yep.
This was a different park than the one where she was hanging out with a friend that night. And I think this was also kind of a rare night out for her because she had a small child. Mm-hmm. And this park was a few miles away, just for geographic reference.
A few miles away from the other park where she was?
Correct.
Which one was closer to her home?
I don't know which one, but neither of them was incredibly far. She wasn't a great distance. She was local. But after that, Amber said that her memory went blank for some time and that she really couldn't remember anything until later when she woke up to someone on top of her assaulting her. So I think what she was saying was that she was drinking a lot and she might have blacked out at that point.
And I'm assuming the person attacking her was not the gentleman she was hanging out with that evening?
We'll see. At the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses worked to treat Amber while also collecting evidence. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly in this case, Amy, Amber had been sexually assaulted in addition to her other brutal assault. Investigators collected all the DNA they could retrieve from the duct tape and from Amber's body. She did have semen on her. Actually, I believe they were able to collect semen from inside of her as well. Mm-hmm. Amber's case was assigned to a female detective who had children of her own and seemed to have a good rapport with Amber as well. Mm-hmm. This detective began a dogged investigation into what had just happened to Amber, and even more importantly, who had done this to her. Detective Seymour, the lead female detective on this case, began by speaking to Amber's good friends, one of whom was the aunt to her son and the person who was watching her son Gabriel the night Amber went out. So I'm not sure why, Amy, but in what I found, they never discuss Gabriel's father as a potential suspect. And I'm not sure if he was completely out of the scene. It almost sounds like he wasn't even around, and maybe geographically it wasn't possible, but I couldn't find any information that they even interviewed him, though I would imagine they did if he was alive.
I was going to say, is it possible he was deceased?
It is possible. Yes, there's very little news story on this, by the way. I only had a few sources for this story. You know, Gabriel's aunt, who was watching him, said that she had no idea who could possibly have wanted to harm Amber, and she was completely shocked to learn of the assault. And then there was the friend that Amber was out with, Eric Vanagunis, who had been the last person to be seen with Amber. The detective interviewed Eric, and here's what he had to say, Amy. He said that he picked Amber up the evening before. This is the next day. It didn't seem like the two were best friends, but perhaps more acquaintances, maybe even recently met.
Were they romantically involved?
Not at this point, they were not.
Okay.
They had a few drinks in Rossborough Park. Remember, it was a nice evening outside. They were sitting, listening to music, having a couple drinks. But in fact, they had a few too many drinks, according to Eric and according to Amber, who had already reported that. And Eric said that Amber fell asleep or passed out on a park bench in the park.
Okay.
So what did Eric do? Well, what any gentleman would do. He left Amber there, passed out alone at night on a park bench by herself.
Okay, the story already sounds... I feel like there's some red flags here already, but continue.
Okay. He said that he drove around for a bit, felt like it was awkward to leave her, so came back to the park, checked on her. She was still passed out, so he decided to go home at that point for the evening, leaving Amber there for the night.
Okay.
When asked about the sexual assault, Eric claimed that he and Amber had not had sexual relations on their outing as they were just platonic friends. But Detective Seymour took a DNA sample as she thought this was suspicious and he had no alibi. And frankly, things weren't looking great for Eric at this point. Okay. The next day, Detective Seymour spoke with Amber again, who was incredibly lucid for just one day post the trauma she had undergone. It was surprising. She was already making a recovery. There were already great signs for her. And it was incredibly helpful to have her participation so early on. Amber told the detective again that she had drank too much with her friend Eric at the park and that she clearly had to have passed out. She had no idea how long she was passed out for, and she couldn't remember really anything after consuming the alcohol. The next thing she remembered was waking up on the ground. She was screaming. She knew that she was being assaulted, and she was duct taped and bound. She said there was a man on top of her, and he had put rope around her neck. So, this is where the ligature marks probably came in. She remembered that she was struck hard in the face by the man, but she could not see her assailant because she had this duct tape all over her eyes.
Oh.
I mean, she was terrified, believing that she was likely going to die as the rope grew tighter and tighter around her neck. Amber said at one point she just saw a bright light flash, and then she lost complete consciousness. When she came to, she was found by that deputy in the park. She was screaming, but she was alive. Her assailant, I would think, likely believing that she was dead when she lost consciousness, fled the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So Amber losing consciousness was probably the very thing that saved her life. 4 days later, Amber was taken to a safe house for a short time as they didn't know who her assailant was, and they were afraid that he might get a tip that she was alive. They had her under an alias in the hospital, just so you know, because there was definite fear about who the person was. Was he local? Would he come back for Amber?
Meghan, can you please remind me what year this was?
Yes, this was 2013 at the time.
Okay, so they're going to test the DNA that was found on her body, right? Case closed?
Absolutely. Police were analyzing the DNA from the duct tape and the rape kit, and they had an answer pretty quickly. And I have to tell you that it was a surprising result to everyone.
Oh, so not Eric?
Not Eric. In fact, the DNA matched nobody in their database. No career criminal assailants, no sex offenders, and not Eric Vanagunis. So his story, it seemed, was likely true and did not make him a perpetrator, just, a bad friend.
Yeah.
Not the kind of guy I would want to hang out with, but...
No.
I mean, I think everyone, though, was shocked, and they were also disappointed and terrified because, God, they were thinking, now we have a dangerous and violent man loose in the community, and we have no idea who he is.
I would imagine that the profile initially was someone who knew her based on the amount of damage done to her face and how brutal the attack was, but it sounds like it may have been a stranger.
Yeah, not necessarily. I don't think the danger or the damage done to her, you could definitely see that from a brutal stranger attack as well.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, a violent sexual rapist, yeah, who's trying to kill her? Absolutely. A very scared Amber had to go back to living her life while investigators kept looking into further leads. They went so far as to investigate people who'd been in Amber's life prior to her attack, but to no avail. They were looking, just so you know, at every male in her life who had been even a friend, a classmate. Like, they really rounded up everyone and asked to collect DNA. And most people agreed to give their DNA. But unfortunately, they weren't making much progress, and several months passed with no breaks and no other similar assaults reported. Though police initially suspected the assailant was someone Amber knew, as we were talking about before, their opinion kind of changed after all these acquaintances and people who knew Amber were eliminated. They just couldn't find any male in her life, which doesn't mean there wasn't a male who didn't know her from a local coffee shop or a job.
I mean, this is 2013. I would expect that there's CCTV in the park.
I don't know
Okay.
if there was CCTV in the park. And even if there was, it doesn't mean that there was CCTV in the exact spot they were at, because they can't surveil probably the whole park.
And there's probably no eyewitnesses because it was at such an early hour.
That's correct. There were no eyewitnesses. So remember, when they were originally drinking and Amber fell asleep, it was on a park bench, but she was assaulted somewhere else. She was brought somewhere more remote in the park at a very remote time.
But you would think between the two parks, there would have been CCTV or an eyewitness, something.
But there was neither.
I know that it's questionable as far as the validity goes, but did they try to use any hypnosis or anything with Amber to see if she could remember anything?
I don't know. That's a good question. Okay. I don't remember that they did use hypnosis with Amber, but it's possible that they did. Unfortunately, it wasn't yielding any results if they did. And she was feeling very scared and hopeless as time went on with no answers, and she had no feelings of security.
She stayed in the same area. I would have been out of there.
She did stay in the same area, and I think she was living alone for a while. But in 2015, Amber was invited to live with some housemates. They were kind of friends of friends who knew Amber. Her friends had thought it would be a great idea for her to live with some people, maybe give her that sense of security she just couldn't find on her own. And Amber liked it. She found support in her new housemates. She became very close friends and confidants with them. One roommate by the name of Stephen Moon, who went by Sam, was particularly kind to Amber. And though Amber was quite reserved, she felt comfortable enough with Sam to share her past trauma with him, which was really surprising because it was the first time Amber had really been able to get this off of her chest. She was very quiet. You can even tell from her interview, she's shy, she's reserved. She's not the kind of person, it struck me, that would want to share this information with lots of people. But after confiding in Sam, Amber was able to move on in some way, feeling that her case wouldn't be solved, I guess, but learning to live with it now because it had been close to 2 years. But Detective Seymour had not given up by any means, just so you know. She was still monitoring any new cases that shared any similarities to Amber, still monitoring DNA, still investigating. Dane Stratton, the deputy who'd been first on the scene, was also haunted, he said, by Amber's case. He said, in fact, that he had nightmares and PTSD after finding Amber that evening. I don't think he'd ever witnessed anything like this before, and hopefully he never did again. But because of what happened, he continued his own personal quest to find this assailant. He said that he monitored parks and other public places, including those bars when people strolled out late. Through this, he ended up becoming kind of a watchdog for other young, intoxicated women in that area. Again, leaving the bars, he was just concerned for the general safety of women who reminded him of Amber. So the crime steered his life as well, changing his mission and shaping his goals as an officer. Solved or not, this case mattered to those in the community who quietly stuck with it. And then all of a sudden, an interesting development in the case. In what seemed like an unrelated event, Amy, Amber's old housemate, Bryce Bailey, called the police to report his bicycle stolen. The police responded and took a report, and after a cursory search, the police found his bike at a pawn shop, and the owner had information that would help the police find the thief. I don't know if you know this, I did not know this, but bike theft is a felony in Colorado.
Oh, I did not know that.
Quite serious, but that also means that it involves the collection of DNA because it is a felony offense.
I know it's going to happen.
You might know it's going to happen. So when the police arrested the man who had stolen the bike, because the pawn shop led them straight to this man.
Oh, he didn't use an alias. He used his real name.
I think he used his real name. Or if he had an alias, somehow the owner knew exactly who he was. Okay. It wasn't a helpful one. When the police found him, though, they took his DNA, and the results were a shocker.
This is exactly what, people debate on whether or not we should take DNA when people are arrested, and I see arguments for and against. I get both sides, but this is a perfect example as to why it's good policy.
I know. And I think the surprise here was that this was a bike theft. Yeah. Nobody would have ever put these two together in a million years.
Incredible.
But when the DNA came back, they had a match to Amber's assailant. The man who stole the bike and her brutal attacker were one and the same. Now, Detective Seymour was very excited to get the results, of course, because she had never given up on this case. And she said that she would never forget the moment she got the call from the DNA analysts. She called Dane Stratton as well, who was elated. Everyone was relieved. So Detective Seymour knew that she had to speak to Amber right away. She wanted to show Amber a picture of the suspect to see if this really was a stranger or if Amber turns out did know this person.
Yeah.
It had been 4 long years, Amy, but it had finally happened. So Detective Seymour went to Amber's home, who was now living in her own apartment with her son, seemingly doing better. And Amber was really relieved that there was a DNA hit, feeling happy and feeling great until she saw the photo of the assailant. Why? Because it turned out that Amber did, in fact, know the person who assaulted her. The man in the photo was Stephen Moon, not someone who the police had collected DNA from, since Stephen was her friend Sam, who she'd started living with 2 years after the incident in that house with a number of housemates.
Okay, so was this a stranger attack and then the two knew each other? Is this a stalker who inserted himself in her life?
It was a stranger attack. And because of the small, I guess, area and network of people, she just wound up moving in with
Wow.
these people. It's very shocking.
You would have thought that Sam would have been like, whoops, I better move out.
I'll explain his background.
Okay.
And we'll get to whether or not, or what his statement is. But he was he was a housemate, but a couch surfing housemate.
Okay.
So he wasn't Bryce, the guy it was his house. He had a room. I think Stefan stayed there off and on.
Okay.
But yes, this was 2 years after the attack.
Wow. And you said that that Amber confided in him as well.
He became a good friend and a confidant to her, someone who she said was so helpful in comforting her and helping her to really move on from this assault.
They were never romantically involved, were they?
They were not. Amber was shocked. She didn't believe it. She thought this had to be a mistake. There was no way. She didn't feel any threat from him. She didn't recognize him. And she didn't meet him till 2 years after this event. But the police said, look, this is the DNA, and they asked Amber for a big favor. They wanted to know if she would call him and confront him to see if he would confess to attacking her. Now, oh my gosh, this is a huge ask for someone who's traumatized. This is kind of terrifying.
But he was arrested by now, correct?
No, he was not.
Oh.
They had the DNA match, but they wanted more.
Gotcha. They wanted ironclad before they arrested him.
Yeah, I think they would have arrested him with the DNA, but they said, let's see if we can get a confession too.
I'm sorry, but they had arrested him for the bike. I'm assuming he was released on bond for the bike.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know what the bond was, but yes,
Yeah.
he was released.
Okay.
So I don't know if everyone could make this kind of phone call, but Amber decided to try. One of the reasons she agreed, though, Amy, is because she really thought that it was a mistake. She thought Sam was not capable of this kind of brutality. So Amber called from the police station the next day, and Sam answered the phone, surprised to hear from his old friend, who at first was cordial, but she got to the point pretty quickly. She told Sam that the police had visited her to let her know that they had finally found out the identity of her attacker. To which Sam appeared curious, but if he was scared, there was no indication in his voice at that point. Well, that changed when Amber told Sam that it was him.
I'm assuming they were surveilling him because he's quite the flight risk now, right?
They might have been surveilling
They
him.
had to have been.
It's definitely possible. Yeah, for sure. I don't know that they weren't.
Okay.
So Amber asked Sam, how could this be that they found his DNA, not only on the duct tape, but frankly, inside of her? He immediately responded that he had no idea. He did not hurt her. He sounded now completely shocked and upset, saying that this was sick. He denied that he would and could ever do such a thing to her. And he had no idea whatsoever how his DNA was connected to this case.
Okay.
Now, Amber started to get angry now because she didn't believe him and because he wasn't confessing to anything at all. In fact, he was indignant about it. But her old friend held steadfast to his declaration of innocence. At the end of the phone call, though, Sam said something very interesting. And this was yet another bombshell in this case, if you will, because I think it was kind of a bombshell that it was a friend of hers. Sam said, oh, wait, you were the girl in the park that one night? Well, yeah, we had sex, but it was consensual. What?
Oh, my God. Okay.
That's right. He said that he had met her that night and that the two had had sex at the park after her friend had left her. And this was for Amber the most disturbing part of the story. And then Sam hung up on her, seemingly defiant and indignant.
Yeah, because he's about to go run.
It seemed clear to Detective Seymour that Sam needed a story for why his DNA was found at the scene and tried to come up with one pretty quickly. And as you would imagine, the police were not buying this story, and Sam was immediately arrested. And yes, I would imagine they had people waiting to arrest him, Amy. Well, Sam was brought in for an interview, and when he was crying. You know, he didn't seem like the boogeyman, I guess, according to the detective, but our boogeymen often wear the faces of everyday people. It's one of the myths we have to dispel in our classes. Though Detective Seymour said this, she also said that she was sure she had, her man, and she wasn't about to let looks or an act fool her. Now, he agreed to speak without a lawyer. Not a smart move for him, or really anyone, but he did. And Sam kept to his story in his interrogation. He claimed that he was absolutely innocent, he was not a rapist, and he did not try to kill his good friend Amber. But I have to tell you, Seymour was a pro. She let him know the facts, but she also acted as a calming influence, trying to make Sam comfortable. I watched her and I thought it was very clear that she was skilled and her technique was very impressive. And I think it worked because Sam finally told, he did not admit to the crime, but he told Detective Seymour that he had responded to a Craigslist ad that had been posted about a woman offering free sexual acts in the park.
Okay, so that should be easy to find out if Amber posted that.
Yes, of course. That woman was Amber, or supposed to be Amber, and he claimed again that he had consensual sex, which is why his DNA was found on and inside of Amber. A distraught Sam said that he was newly separated and lonely, desperate for company, if you will. The story takes another turn, okay? Now, he claimed that he had told his old roommate, Bryce Bailey, who he was living with at the time. Remember, this was the one who reported the bike stolen. He claimed that he told Bryce about the girl in the park who was having sex with strangers because he had just had sex with her.
Okay.
And according to Sam, Bryce left the house and went out for a while and returned home later that evening with a young woman who he brought into his room. Sam said that he could hear a violent encounter with a young woman screaming in Bryce's room for some time.
He's trying to implicate Bryce now.
Yes, he is.
Wow, he's really grasping at straws.
A scared Sam said that he hid until Bryce emerged from the room carrying a bloody and deceased young woman. Sam asked about it the next day, but Bryce, he said, had physically assaulted him and threatened him that he better stay quiet or it would get worse.
Unbelievable.
Detective Seymour pushed back on this story and it was trying to convince Sam to take responsibility. She went more the route was, you could ease Amber's pain now. You could do the right thing. You could change her life for the better. Sam did not take the bait on this aspect, though, refusing to admit that he was the rapist. But he had given this very implausible story that Detective Seymour now had to work with. While frustrating her, because now she had to, of course, investigate this aspect, she began by taking a look at Sam's background. And she also was simultaneously investigating Bryce Bailey to see if there could possibly be any credibility to the claims. That's her job.
This is an example of a waste of police resources. This happens a lot, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it does, but she had to do it. If they're going to go to trial, too, she's got to eliminate every possibility. Seymour began by interviewing Stefan's parents, who told the detective that their son was never a violent person. They were genuinely shocked at the news of the crime and the DNA match. They did say that Sam had been a couch surfer. They said perhaps he had made some bad juvenile mistakes that were not quite serious, but that he wasn't really a bad person. He wasn't the kind of person they felt that would ever harm a woman. And they did allude to the fact that he had been arrested before in his younger years, but it did not seem like for any violent crimes. At the end of the day, they couldn't really offer any insight into this type of behavior. And even if they could, they're his parents, so would they? Some parents do. They'll cooperate and be honest. Some will, try to minimize the crimes or the behaviors of their children in order to protect them. So there's no real way to know how much was legitimate. Next, though, it was Bryce Bailey they had to speak with. And let me tell you, Bryce was really surprised to hear this story by his old friend Sam, who had stolen his bike as well. He said that he had never met Amber before she moved in and that he certainly had not attacked her ever. He readily agreed to give a DNA sample, no problem at all. He said that he had known Sam since they were much younger, and he said that he didn't see any violent tendencies from Sam, but he did say that Sam was kind of a career liar. He was just the kind of guy who lied. What's interesting is that it does seem Bryce and his parents were saying that Sam was irresponsible. He lied. I don't think he had any gainful employment, but no one had seen violent tendencies from him before. Despite all of Sam Moon's claims, the police were confident they had their man, and so they turned this case over to the prosecutor. Now, Sam Moon was not about to discuss a plea bargain, opting to take his case to trial and maintaining his innocence still. Unfortunately for Amber, she would have to testify, despite her confusion about how this could be happening. And I have to say, at this point, Amber said, in watching the interview, she still wasn't positive Sam was her assailant. She still found it so hard to wrap her head around this.
Like the coincidence that they ended up living together, probably.
Yes. I think for her, it was very hard to reconcile the fact that he was so kind to her and that she didn't recognize him either.
Yeah.
Which I understand completely. The trial was held 6 years after her attack in August of 2019. The prosecution put forth the evidence and testimony from the deputy who first responded, the DNA analysts, and Detective Seymour, and the evidence against Sam, it was pretty strong. Sam testified, which was a surprise, I guess feeling that he had to offer an explanation, but he stuck to the same story about a woman posting an ad in Craigslist to explain how his DNA was found on Amber's body. And by the way, the only DNA that was found on Amber was Sam Moon. So if she had been giving out sexual favors, it somehow happened that nobody else's DNA was left on her.
And I'm assuming there's zero evidence to corroborate that she was ever doing such a thing on Craigslist.
Right. So they did look into Craigslist. And look, they found ads for sexual activity and other things. But they couldn't find an ad that matched Amber or what, the details that he was given. I believe his defense kind of countered with it could have been taken down, deleted, but it was definitely there at some point.
Okay.
Amber took the stand as well. She was stoic on the stand and said that she realized during the trial that it was absolutely Sam who was her assailant. That was how she really came to accept it, by seeing all the evidence play out in front of her. Amber told her story, and it was incredibly impactful to the jury. And best of all, Amy, Amber said that telling her story, she was so afraid to do it, but she said it completely had the opposite effect. She felt totally empowered afterwards. A quick verdict was no surprise, but it wasn't what you might have expected. So on the attempted murder charge, Sam Moon was found not guilty, despite what seemed overwhelming evidence. He had strangled her. She was almost dead.
That's strange.
I thought it was very strange. Amber and the others were devastated when they started reading the verdict. The other charges for assault, kidnapping, a slew of other violent charges, he was found guilty on all of those charges.
Okay.
Which was a relief, because I think there was a fear after the not guilty verdict was read. But what would the sentence be for these other charges? Well, the judge gave him life in prison.
It almost doesn't matter then, because he would have gotten probably the same sentence, right?
That is correct, yes. With that verdict, the judge, Amber, everyone in the case had basically ensured that Sam Moon would never harm another woman again. So it was a good outcome in the end.
Did Amber feel like justice was served? Because I know I just said it didn't matter. I didn't mean it didn't matter because of the sentence. I just meant as far as practicality, how long he would serve. But did Amber feel like she was okay with this verdict?
Yes, as I recall, when she said she did, she felt good in the end because she knew that he was never going to be able to leave prison. He would never harm someone again. So I think there was just fear. I'm not sure if it was ever made clear why the jury didn't convict him of the attempted murder. I thought the evidence was there, but perhaps they thought this was more of an assault. I really don't know. But yes, I believe she was satisfied with the outcome of life in prison. Okay, so the deputy, Dane Stratton, who had the opportunity to testify at the case, found some relief as well in this verdict and in meeting Amber and speaking out on her behalf. So he had kind of met with her afterwards, which he said was very comforting as well to see her in a much better place. Detective Seymour felt great relief in the verdict as well, and especially in the sentence in the end. Sam Moon's parents were devastated, not believing that their son was guilty of the charges and shocked at the lengthy sentence that he received. As for Amber, she reclaimed her power, feeling much more at peace and moving forward with her son and with a renewed hope about her future.
I'm assuming he's going to appeal his sentence, right?
I'm assuming he already has, but since I didn't read anything about appeals, I doubt any appeal would be granted. I didn't even see any appealable grounds here. Okay, so glad in the end that the story did have somewhat of a positive outcome, right? So what happened here? How do we explain this? Well, unfortunately for Amber, being alone and asleep in the park, that made her vulnerable to a predator.
So are we thinking that he attacked her there and then tried to get rid of her body in the other park? Or do we think that he moved her to the other park and assaulted her there?
I think he moved her to the other park and assaulted her there. Yes. Maybe the first park was just too public.
Yeah.
She was passed out. Maybe he walked her to the car. Not exactly sure how that happened. And I didn't see that in the details, but yeah. One thing that I found after his arrest was that they had analyzed his phone. And remember, this is after her assault, long after, 2 years. And he had many images and searches for violent rape fantasies that Detective Seymour said were quite alarming.
Okay.
Though he did not have a violent criminal history or reported incidents of violence against women that I could find, it doesn't mean that A, those crimes don't exist, because they could be and just not reported. Or it's possible as well that he perpetrated other lower level crimes for which he wasn't caught, which is often the start of this type of violent rapist. And, he did have some criminal record, Amy, at least for thefts. It seemed for other juvenile crimes, even though his parents didn't quite reveal the full scope. And I suspect that there were other instances. My guess would be that he had other undetectable incidences that at least involved, I hate the word peeping in on women because it's really not serious enough, but I would say at least beginning with peeping on women, stalking, I bet some type of lower level stalking. My assumption, I really believe, was that there's going to be some other offenses that were building that he was not caught for. I think that he was fantasizing about rape and violence against women, and I believe that would categorize him as a lust killer, which is someone who kills for sexual satisfaction. And it seemed like he had been fantasizing about it and did so after.
He resided in that same area his whole life. Like, I'm wondering if there's other crimes, like other hits that might come with his DNA.
It's possible, but they didn't find him. So I would assume that Amber was his first serious attack. And the reason there probably wasn't a subsequent one, at least in those 2 years, there might have been one after, but was Amber survived. And that probably was a deterrent, and that probably scared him. Had she not survived, I don't know that we would not have seen another attack in a closer proximity. I mean, I believe that this was probably the apprehension of a serial offender in the making, whether serial rapist, serial killer, or both. Also, let's point out that he was a loner with no social bonds. He could not maintain romantic relationships. He didn't have any stable career or employment, no stable home. He was a transient in some regards, couch surfing. He had no real pro-social investment in society in general. So I have to imagine the lack of social bonds was part of the problem. Would you think so as well, Amy, or no?
Yeah, the only thing that's throwing me off, as far as like his profile is that he had no history of violence. So that's interesting because usually with offenders like this, you see at least a history of inappropriate behavior, violence, something. It doesn't sound like anyone who knew him really could have predicted this.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think they could have. But I truly believe that he just wasn't caught for whatever acts he perpetrated. And he has other, he's kind of a versatile career criminal, which a lot of, by the way, serial offenders are as well. They commit other acts. So it sounds like he was in the making.
Yeah, he was escalating, right? Escalating behavior.
Yeah, I think so. I just think it's such a relief that someone like him was caught and that he, Amber and everyone else, they were able to stop him before he perpetrated another serious crime.
Yes.
So as for, did the system get this right? Well, this is an easy one for me. I was disappointed that he wasn't convicted of attempted murder, but I wasn't on the jury, right? And I don't know the full evidence that they saw or did not see that would have led them to that decision. Him being convicted on the other charges and sentenced to life, I think, serves the public very well, though.
So, Meghan, this is life with the possibility of parole. Do you know what that looks like in Colorado?
I don't. And I you know what? I said he got life in prison, but I'm not sure when his parole eligibility will be.
Okay.
It would likely be, if there is eligible, at least after 30 years or so.
Yeah, I was thinking.
When Moon would be in his 50s to 60s, which, again, doesn't even guarantee that he would get parole, just, a possibility to plead his case. Okay, well, that is everything I have for today's case. Before I finish off, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
You know how much I love routine activities theory, and I know it's often used as a macro explanation, but I think in this situation, you have, unfortunately, a motivated offender. I'm assuming he was intoxicated. He was out late by himself, maybe bored, maybe looking around, maybe not. It seems like it was a crime of opportunity, but I also think you have the lack of capable guardian, and you have, unfortunately, an attractive target. I don't mean by what she looks like. I mean by the fact that she was alone and she was incapacitated. I'm not putting any blame at all on the victim in this case, but it's just a way to understand how this happened.
Sure.
And I also wonder if he was out looking for it or or if it was, like I said, a crime of opportunity. I actually am leaning towards it being a crime of opportunity, although it is possible that she caught his eye earlier in the night. Maybe he was following her.
I think it could be a crime of opportunity, but the opportunity happens because he's out trolling, hunting.
You think he was, yeah, okay. Like he was looking for the opportunity.
I don't think he was out at the park at 4 a.m. for, reasons of exercise. Let's put it that way.
You don't think he was just flying a kite?
No, exactly. So I think it's a little bit of both. But yes, you're absolutely right to explain routine activities theory and incorporate that as well, unfortunately.
And also, victimology, theories of victimization, I think are very relevant here. And again, they're not to blame the victim. They're just to provide an explanation for how something happened. And I think victim precipitation theory is very relevant in this situation, in the sense of why her and not somebody else.
Correct. Yes, I think so. Thank you for adding to that explanation. I tend to focus on the offender and the motivations there, but it's very, very helpful as well to understand victimology. So thank you, Amy, and thank you to everyone else for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time on Women and Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today's episode include Dateline, The Coloradoan, and Oxygen.com.